Tonight, we step into an old Greek story that moves like a slow tide, forward, back, forward again, until you can feel its meaning settle. If the day has left your head busy, let this myth carry the weight for you. If you enjoy drifting through these tales, you can like the video and subscribe, only if you want more nights like this. Now let your breathing become easy, as if you are lying in a field where the grass is soft enough to forgive you. In the world of the Olympians, that field was watched over by Demeter, goddess of grain, keeper of the patient miracle. Demeter was not the goddess of sudden spectacle. She was the reason a seed dares to crack open in darkness, the reason a stalk keeps climbing even when the wind leans on it, when wheat thickened and turned from green to gold, when bread rose in warm ovens, when a village survived winter because its jars were full. Demeter's power was there, steady as the moon returning on schedule. People honored her in quiet ways, the first sheaf set aside, the last grain saved, a whispered thanks before a meal. And Demeter's greatest joy was her daughter Kore, whose name meant maiden because she belonged to beginnings. Kore laughed like water over stones. She ran with nymphs, barefoot and fearless, braiding wildflowers into crowns that wilted by evening and then were made again the next day, as if loss were only a small pause. When Kore danced, grass sprang back where her feet had pressed. When she knelt, new shoots seemed to notice. Demeter watched her with a love that held both pride and caution. She knew the world could be rearranged without warning. Gods made bargains. Kings made decisions. Storms arrived. So she taught Kore the ordinary rules of safety. Stay with your friends. Do not wander where the ground feels strange. Do not accept gifts that separate you from the group. And when you feel the air go suddenly still, turn back. But spring is curious by nature, and Kore was spring with a heartbeat. One clear morning the meadow shone as if it had been newly painted. The air smelled of warm soil and crushed leaves. Bees stitched invisible lines between blossoms. Kore and her companions filled baskets with violet and crocus, laughing when petals stuck to their fingers. They sang little songs that had no purpose except joy. And joy, in myth, can tempt the attention of powers that do not understand it. Then Kore saw it, a narcissus unlike any other, taller than her knee, heavy with blooms, gleaming as if lit from inside. Its scent was so strong, it felt like it touched the back of her throat. Sweet at first, then sharp, then strangely cold. Like snow melt in a silver cup, the nymphs called to her, teasing, telling her to hurry. But the flowers stood alone, perfectly framed, as if the whole meadow had leaned away to give it space. Kore stepped toward it. Her sandals brushed the grass. She reached out, and the stem did not bend. Instead, the world beneath it opened. Not with a crash, not with thunder, but with the clean sound of a door unlatching. The earth split into a dark seam. Cold poured up, carrying the smell of stone, deep water, and something older than fear. A chariot rose from the opening, black as obsidian, its wheels leaving no tracks in the grass. Horses burst upward, their coats swallowing light, their eyes bright and unblinking. In the chariot stood Hades, god of the Underworld, crowned with a shadowed wreath. his face calm in a way that made the scene feel inevitable. Kore screamed for her mother. The scream tore through the air, and every bird nearby scattered. Her friends froze, mouths open, hands full of flowers. Some tried to run for help. Others reached for Kore and found only air, as if distance had suddenly become a wall. Kore tried to flee, but the chariot was already beside her. Hades seized her, not roughly, not tenderly, simply with the certainty of someone taking what has been granted. Her basket tipped and spilled, blossoms tumbling like bright coins. She clawed at the chariot rail, at the air, at the edge of daylight itself. For a heartbeat she saw the blue sky, the narcissus still upright, the nymphs reaching too late. Then the horses plunged back into the seam. The meadow swallowed the sound, and the earth closed again until it looked whole. Above, the sun kept shining. A breeze moved through grass as if nothing had happened. And that normal breeze was its own kind of horror. If you could have followed that chariot, you would have felt the world change layer by layer. The warmth of sunlight fell away first, replaced by a chill that crept under skin. The smell of flowers faded, replaced by mineral damp, the clean bite of stone, the metallic hint of ancient water. The underworld was not a fiery pit in these oldest myths. It was a kingdom of order and endings, a place where the dead arrived as naturally as leaves fall. Rivers marked its laws. There was the Styx, black and solemn, the river of oaths that even gods respected. There was the Acheron, river of sorrow, and the Cocytus, river of lament, and the Lethe, river of forgetting that washed memories thin. Somewhere a ferryman waited, Charon, receiving coins placed on mortal tongues, moving the newly dead across dark water with the bored patience of someone who has seen every face. Fields of asphodel stretched like pale grass under an unmoving sky. Neither torture nor comfort, simply aftermath. Deeper still stood the places of judgment, where certain souls were honored and others punished, because even in death the Greeks imagined consequences. Shades moved through it, quiet as smoke, carrying the soft imprint of who they once were. They did not rush. Time behaved differently there, thick and slow, and that slowness pressed on Kore like a weight. Hades ruled this realm as king, not as a clownish villain, but as a power that rarely needed to raise his voice. He guarded balance. He kept the dead from flooding back into the world of the living. He was necessary, and necessity is not beloved. In a palace carved from dark rock, veined with silver and iron, where torches burned with a steadier flame, Hades had wealth that could never be spent. Gems, metals, and secrets rested in his vaults because everything buried belonged to him. But a throne in an echoing hall does not laugh. The other gods had partners, feasts, noise, living company. Hades had silence and duty. So he wanted a queen, someone whose presence would make the halls feel less like a tomb. In the politics of Olympus, permission matters. Zeus, the Sky King, held the final word in many arrangements. He could turn a personal desire into law by calling it order. Some tellings say Hades asked directly, and Zeus nodded. Other tellings say Zeus did not forbid it. And in that world, not forbidding was close to granting. Either way, Kore was treated like a piece in a plan, not a person. No one asked her if she wanted a crown that came with darkness. No one asked Demeter if she would survive the loss. This is the cold spine of the myth, a family decision made as a treaty. Kore wept as the chariot passed gates that looked like cliffs. She heard distant water and the hush of countless voices. She called for her mother until her throat hurt. But sound behaved differently there, as if the air refused to carry hope. When they reached the palace, Cerberus, the three-headed dog, raised his heads and tasted the air. A guardian more animal than monster. Hades spoke to Kore. Some say, promising honor and power, promising she would be safe, promising she would learn to rule beside him. But promises do not feel like comfort when you have been taken. And as she stood in that shadowed hall, the surface world above continued in bright ignorance, not yet aware that spring had just been removed like a thread from a woven cloth. Far above, Demeter felt the loss before she understood it. A sudden emptiness opened in her chest, as if her breath had been stolen. The wind tasted wrong. Light seemed thinner, as though the day had leaned away. She called Kore's name once, then again, her voice rolling over valleys and over the backs of hills. She ran to the meadow and found only evidence-torn petals, crushed grass, the dropped basket, and that narcissus still standing too straight, too deliberate, its perfume lingering like a lie. Grief hit first, then fury, then a strange, focused calm. Demeter lit torches and began to search. For 9 days and 9 nights, she wandered without food and without rest, because gods can endure what mortals cannot. And because a mother in that state does not want endurance anyway, she wants her child. She questioned shepherds on lonely slopes. She questioned fishermen by moonlit water. She demanded answers from rivers. And when a river could not answer, its surface seemed to dim in shame. She walked into forests where even deer stepped aside. She stood at crossroads and listened for the echo of a scream. Sometimes a village woke to the sight of a tall woman with blazing torches, hair unbound, eyes bright with grief, and the villagers felt their own hearts tighten as if they had been reminded of something sacred. No one dared offer her advice. Some offered bread. She did not eat. Some offered wine. She did not drink. On the 10th day, Hecate came to her, goddess of crossroads, carrying her own torches. Hecate had heard a cry cut the darkness, but had not seen the thief. She did not tell Demeter to be patient. She joined her, because some losses demand witness. Together they went to Helios, the sun, who sees what shadows try to hide. Helios listened, and because he cannot lie about what he has watched, he told Demeter the truth. It was Hades who took Kore, and Zeus had allowed it. Demeter did not scream then. Her rage became heavy and quiet, like a storm cloud that has decided where it will break. She marched to Olympus, demanded justice, and found only excuses dressed as divine logic. They spoke of alliances and balance, of what a king requires, of how a maiden becomes a queen. Demeter heard only the sound of power congratulating itself. So Demeter did the one thing that made Zeus truly uneasy. She withdrew her gift. She left the bright halls of the gods and walked among mortals, disguised as an old woman so grief could move unnoticed. And as she walked, the earth followed her mood. Seeds refused to wake. Shoots rose pale and collapsed. Fruit trees held blossoms and then dropped them like tears. The green world began to brown at the edges. Fields that should have been soft with promise hardened like clay left in sun. In homes, mothers measured grain by pinches, counting days. In towns, bakers stared at empty sacks and felt fear spread. Oxen grew thin. Children slept and did not wake easily. Prayers rose like smoke to the gods. But Demeter did not soften. This was not cruelty for sport. It was the only language Olympus respected if her daughter was kept in darkness. Then the world above would also darken, with torches still in her hands. Demeter walked toward a small city called Eleusis and sat beside a well, silent as stone. There, disguised and exhausted, she waited, and the world waited with her. Soon the daughters of King Celeus came to draw water. They saw the old woman sitting with her head bowed, a stranger whose grief felt heavy enough to make the air still. They spoke gently, as people do when they sense sorrow they cannot fix. Demeter, hiding her name, told them she had been taken from her home, wandering without purpose, and asked only for a place to rest. The girls led her to their mother, Mythology, queen of Eleusis, who offered the stranger a seat by the hearth. Servants brought a cup of sweet wine, but Demeter turned it away. Grief had made her mouth taste of ash. Instead, she asked for kykeon, a simple drink of water mixed with barley and mint. It was humble, almost plain, and yet it was a ritual choice, as if she were reminding herself what she protected. Mythology gave her the cup, and Demeter drank slowly, eyes fixed on the fire. For a long while she did not speak. One of the household women, Iambe, tried to coax a smile from her with jokes and playful gestures. At first, Demeter's face stayed carved from stone. But then, almost against her will, a small laugh escaped, thin as a cracked bell, yet real. In myth, even a goddess in grief needs a moment of human warmth to keep moving. Metanera soon asked the stranger to nurse her infant son, Demophon, because Demeter's presence felt steady, like the earth itself. Demeter took the child into her arms, and the baby quieted as if he recognized safety. She fed him not only milk but a strange blessing, rubbing him with ambrosia, the food of the gods, and breathing over him as though each breath could stitch strength into bone. Night after night she tried to do more. In some versions, she meant to make the child immortal, a gift to this household that had shown her kindness. When the palace slept, Demeter placed Demophon in the hearth fire, not to burn him, but to burn away his mortal weakness, the way a smith tempers iron. Flames licked around him without harm, while Demeter watched, solemn and careful. But Metanera woke and saw her baby in fire. She screamed, as any mother would. The spell snapped like a twig. Demeter lifted Demophon out, alive. But the path to immortality had been broken by fear. Demeter's grief flared into anger, not at the queen's love, but at the world's smallness. the way mortals could not trust what they did not understand. The old woman's disguise fell away. Light seemed to rise from her skin. Her height filled the room. The scent of barley and earth surged, as if fields had suddenly entered the palace. Metanera and the household dropped to their knees, trembling, because they realized they had been hosting a goddess. Demeter did not punish them. She did not crush the palace or turn the family to stone. Instead, she spoke with the weary authority of someone who has carried too much. Build me a temple here. Give me a place where I can sit apart and mourn. A place where mortals can honor me properly. The king obeyed, and Eleusis raised a great hall for her, thick-walled and quiet. Demeter entered it and sat on a low stool, wrapped in her sorrow like a cloak. She let her torches go out. She let her hair fall loose. She refused the feasts of Olympus and the comforts of mortals. From that temple, her grief pressed outward into the land. The famine deepened. Plows scratched at soil that would not answer. Rain fell and did no good. Farmers stared at empty furrows and felt the terror of a future that had no harvest. Even the gods began to notice the silence in their altars. No smoke rose from sacrifices because there was no grain, no bread, no life to offer. And as the world above tightened toward ruin, Demeter remained in her temple at Eleusis, waiting for Zeus to understand that this was not a phase of mourning. It was a demand. Zeus finally felt the consequences in places even a god cannot ignore. The scent of sacrifice vanished from the air. Altars stood cold, without grain. Mortals could not feed themselves. And without mortals, the gods would lose the songs and honors that kept their names alive. Zeus sent Iris, swift rainbow messenger, to plead with Demeter. Demeter did not move. He sent other gods with gifts and promises. Demeter turned her face away. At last, Zeus chose a different messenger, one who could cross boundaries, Hermes, quick-footed, wearing his winged sandals. Hermes did not bring gifts. He brought a command, sealed by the Sky King's authority. He was told to go down into Hades' realm, speak plainly, and return with Kor, whether the Underworld liked it or not. And with that decision, the story turned. Like a seed finally breaking open after a long, tight winter, Hermes moved like a thought. One moment, he was in bright air. The next, he was descending through cracks in the world, following the road that mortals never walked twice. As he went down, daylight thinned until it felt like a memory. The underworld opened around him dark rivers, silent fields, the far sound of water dripping in endless chambers. Shades turned their faces as he passed because Hermes was not one of them. He still carried breath. At the gates, Cerberus lifted 3 heads and sniffed, not with rage, but with suspicion, as if scent itself were a law. Hermes spoke the name of Zeus with the calm authority of a messenger who does not enjoy threats but understands them. Cerberus stepped aside. The path opened. Hermes crossed rivers, whose surfaces looked like polished stone, and he heard the faint murmur of thousands of voices. Not screaming, not singing, simply existing without sunlight. At last he reached the palace where Hades sat, and beside him sat Persephone. If Kore had once looked like spring, Persephone now looked like spring that has learned winter. Her eyes were clear, but there was a new stillness in her, a measured way of holding her hands, a quiet strength. She was dressed not in meadow colors but in deep tones that caught torchlight like wine. Hades watched Hermes approach without standing. He did not pretend to be surprised. Hermes delivered Zeus's command with few words: the girl must return, because the world above is dying. Hades listened, as though he were weighing a contract. His gaze moved to Persephone, and for a moment it was not cold. It was almost careful, as if he understood that taking a person is one thing, but keeping her against the will of gods who control sky and sea is another. Hermes did not argue with a lecture. He simply explained the state of the world above. Demeter's grief had become famine, and famine would become extinction. Without mortals, there would be no festivals, no hymns, no offerings, no stories. Even gods, for all their power, are fed by being remembered. Persephone listened, fingers tightening around the pomegranate skin, still staining her lips. She did not burst into childish relief. She looked older, as if the underworld had taught her the weight of choices. She could feel two claims on her body at once: the pull of her mother and the pull of a realm that now knew her name. Hades watched quietly. He did not pretend he was doing this out of pure kindness. He said, plainly, that an order had been made. If Zeus demanded, he would not start a war that would tear the world. But he also said, just as plainly, that there are rules in his kingdom. No one enters and leaves unchanged. Then he offered Persephone a last meal, as if hospitality could soften what had been done. Some tellings say she was too hungry to refuse. Others say Hades spoke gently, reminding her that queens do not leave without choosing how they will be remembered. He set a pomegranate before her, its red seeds shining like small rubies. Persephone hesitated. In Greek myth, eating in a realm can bind you to it, the way signing a name binds you to paper. But she had lived in darkness for long enough to know that refusing food can also be a kind of surrender. She took the pomegranate and ate a few seeds, a small act. Almost nothing, yet enough. The sweetness burst on her tongue, bright and sharp. In that moment, the underworld claimed a threat of her. Hades did not smile, but the room seemed to settle, as if a rule had quietly clicked into place. Hermes, seeing what had happened, said nothing. Messengers do not always get to undo the details. He gathered Persephone and led her upward, away from the rivers and the waiting dead, back toward air and light. When Persephone rose into daylight again, the world reacted as if it had been holding its breath. The first thing she felt was wind, warm and alive, full of ordinary scents: pine, resin, smoke from hearth fires, damp earth, sheep wool, and the faintest trace of bread that had almost disappeared. The first thing she saw was her mother. Demeter stood outside the temple at Eleusis like a storm made into a woman, eyes hollow from sleepless grief, shoulders tense, as if she had forgotten what relaxation felt like. When she recognized her daughter, she did not speak at first. She ran. Persephone ran too, and they collided and held each other so tightly it looked painful, as if they feared the world would steal them apart again if there was even a finger's width of space. Demeter pressed her face to her daughter's hair, breathing her in as if smell could confirm reality. Persephone clung back, and for a moment she was only Corée again, the meadow girl returning to the sun. Around them, The air warmed. In distant fields, birds began to call again. Cautious at first, then louder. But joy in myth is rarely allowed to stay simple. Hermes, respectful and practical, delivered Zeus's message. Persephone was returned by command, and the famine must end. Demeter looked at the messenger and answered the Sky King not with softness, but with terms. She would restore the world only when her daughter was fully hers again. Then the small red stain on Persephone's lips became important. Terms, bound to truth, explained what Persephone had eaten. Demeter's arms tightened. Her face changed, not into rage like before, but into something sharper understanding. The underworld had set its hook. Zeus was summoned to Eleusis, and there, on the edge of a dying world, the gods finally spoke as if consequences mattered. Zeus tried to command. Demeter reminded him that command means little when the earth refuses to grow. Hades, from below, sent word that he would not keep Persephone entirely, but he would not be cheated of what was his either. So the gods made a compromise that sounds like law and feels like grief. Persephone would live part of the year above, with her mother, and part of the year below, with her husband, because the seeds she ate had tied her to both. How long depends on the telling, a third of the year, half the year, or a set number of months measured like a sentence. What matters is the pattern return and departure, reunion and separation, written into the calendar itself. Hermes negotiated carefully, weighing every word because the survival of mortals depended on it. The bargain held. Demeter, still holding Persephone, finally nodded. She could not erase what was done, but she could shape what happened next. She stepped onto the temple threshold and lifted her hands. It was not a spell with fireworks. It was a permission. The earth took it like a gulp of water. When Demeter finally released her grip on the land, it was not gradual. It was like a door thrown open. Green returned so quickly that mortals later spoke of it as a miracle bud swelling overnight. Shoots breaking through, streams clearing, birds nesting as if they had been waiting for permission. In Eleusis, people ran to their fields and laughed in disbelief when their hands came up smelling of living soil again. The first loaves baked after the famine were offered back to Demeter with shaking gratitude, because hunger makes devotion honest. And so the seasons were born from a family's negotiation. When Persephone returns to the world above, Demeter's relief opens the earth. Buds swell, rivers loosen, fields green in a rush, as if trying to make up for lost time. Spring is the sound of Demeter saying yes again. Summer is her confidence, steady and generous. Fruit hangs heavy, grain turns gold. People bake bread and feel safe enough to sing because the pantry has an answer. But when the time comes for Persephone to descend again, the light seems to shorten. Evenings arrive sooner. Leaves yellow and fall like small goodbyes. Fields that were loud with life go quiet and flat. Winter, in this myth, is not punishment. It is Demeter holding her breath while her daughter is away, keeping her strength close, refusing to pretend she is fine. Below, Persephone walks back through the gates of Hades, and this time she is not only a stolen girl, she is a queen who understands two worlds. She sits beside Hades and learns the laws of endings, how to welcome the dead with dignity, how to keep memory from becoming a haunting. how to make a realm of shadow feel less like terror. Above, Demeter stays in Eleusis in many tellings. Not forever, but long enough to leave a gift behind. She teaches people how to plant and store, how to honor the cycles, how to hold ceremonies that turn sorrow into meaning. From those teachings grew the Eleusinian mysteries, secret rites that promised comfort to those who feared death. Because Persephone had proved that darkness is not only erasure, it can also be a doorway that leads back. So when you notice the first cool evenings of autumn, or the way winter's silence can make a room feel larger, this myth offers a gentle explanation somewhere in the deep. A queen is returning to her other home, and when spring arrives and the air smells suddenly young, it is a mother opening her hands again. The story does not deny darkness. It gives darkness a schedule. It promises that absence is real, but it is not endless. If today has felt heavy, you can borrow that promise for a moment. And if you are listening tonight while your own life feels divided between what you must do and what you wish you could keep, remember Persephone's path. The story says you can belong to more than one place and still return. For now, let the dark be gentle. Let your thoughts drift like falling leaves, and let sleep come quietly. And if you want a simple blessing to carry into sleep, let it be, this return is built into the pattern. And now, with the story settled back into its cycle, you can let your eyes close and drift into sleep. When the bargain was finally spoken and the first shoots pushed through the soil again, Demeter did not simply vanish into distant Olympus, as if the crisis had been nothing more than an argument at a divine banquet. In many tellings, she lingers near Eleusis, because that is where she had walked as an exhausted stranger. And that is where mortals had offered her a hearth when the world felt empty. The land around the city had seen what hunger does to a community, but it makes the strongest voices go quiet, turns laughter into careful counting, and makes even sunshine feel like a question. So Demeter stays long enough to translate the miracle of returning spring into something a human mind can practice. The stories remember how she sat beside the well, refusing food and refusing comfort, until a bold servant named Iambe made her laugh. Not because grief was gone, but because grief loosened enough for breath to come back. They remember the simple drink she finally accepted. The kykeon, a humble mixture rather than a luxurious feast. As if her body needed ordinary warmth more than divine splendor. They remember Queen Metanera and the child Demophoon, and the startling moment Demeter tried to burn away mortality itself. Not out of cruelty, but out of desperate love, until a frightened cry broke the spell and reminded everyone that even gods cannot simply erase the human condition. Then comes the gentler gift Demeter teaches, or authorizes, the knowledge of grain and planting, of timing and storage, of how to care for soil so it can care for you. In some versions, she sends Triptolemus out with seed and instruction, a messenger of bread and steadiness. And alongside that practical skill, she offers a ritual frame for the deepest fear humans carry. The fear that everything ends, that the beloved vanish into a dark that cannot be reached. The Eleusinian mysteries, guarded by secrecy for centuries, grow from this mythic memory the moment a goddess who has tasted loss tells mortals that life and death are not strangers on separate worlds, but neighbors in the same house. and that a person can face the winter of the heart and still be met, eventually, by a returning light. And because this story is also about what people do when they cannot control the sky, the myth gives Eleusis a texture you can almost feel. You can picture a small town at the edge of wider powers, listening to distant thunder of kings and gods, and still sweeping its own doorstep. Demeter's presence there is described like weather at first, a drought of the spirit, then a slow return of moisture. She is not shining in gold. She is wrapped in a dark veil, moving carefully, speaking little, as if words might crack her open. The locals do not solve her grief, but they give her simple, human structure: a bench by the well, a cup set down without demands, a room that does not feel watched. In the palace, the women try to coax her into ordinary life, and when she finally agrees to nurse Demephon, it feels like a fragile bridge back to warmth. Even the failed attempt at immortality becomes a lesson in patience. A mother's panic interrupts, and Demeter reveals herself, not to punish, but to insist on honesty. Mortality cannot be bullied into disappearing. Life is precious because it can be lost, and caring for life means respecting its limits. So she turns her power toward what can be taught. She shows the timing of sowing and reaping, the wisdom of leaving grain for next year, the quiet discipline of storing seed. She teaches that abundance is not only a gift, it is a responsibility. You cannot eat the future. You cannot burn all your hope in one feast. And from that practical wisdom grows something even more intimate: the rites at Eleusis, whatever their exact form, are imagined as a path from panic into steadiness, a procession in the dusk, torches bobbing like fireflies, songs that begin as lament and end as assurance. The sight of a single ear of grain lifted in silence, as if to say, "Look, the earth remembers." To take part is to learn that you are not alone in fearing the dark, and that fear can be held, shared, and softened. Persephone returns with her own quiet authority, and the world above learns that spring is not only joy arriving, but reunion arriving after a test. When she steps back into sunlight each year, she does not come as the same girl who leaned toward a flower without listening for warning in the stillness. She comes as someone who has learned the geography of absence. She knows the chill of halls where voices fade, and she knows what it means to live with two truths at once. She can love her mother fiercely and still carry a bond to the underworld, because the pomegranate has tied her to a season below. And seasons are a kind of law. That queenship is often overlooked when the story is told quickly. Down in Hades' realm, Persephone is not only a captive, she becomes a figure with power to answer prayers, to soften sentences, to guide the newly dead, and to hold a lamp of meaning where meaning feels scarce. In later imagination, she is also a judge, or at least a presence that insists on fairness in a realm where there is no longer any performance, no more pretending. Hades remains Hades, stern and unyielding, keeper of boundaries. But Persephone's arrival changes the tone of the place. Like a candle set on cold stone, around Demeter and Persephone, the helpers matter. Hecate, with her torches, hears the cry and comes to stand beside a mother who cannot sleep. She does not fix the problem by force. She keeps company, which is sometimes the first step toward survival. Helios, the sun who sees everything, tells the truth when secrecy tries to settle like dust over what happened. Zeus, who usually thinks in terms of balance and authority, is forced to listen when the world begins to starve. The myth keeps hinting that healing is rarely a solo act. It is made from companions, from honest information, from the courage to ask for help, and from the willingness to accept that some wounds do not vanish. They become part of a new rhythm that still allows love to move. Persephone's divided year also changes how everyone understands choice. The myth is honest that the underworld bargain is not perfect. It is a compromise made under pressure, a solution stitched together because the world cannot survive a mother's absolute refusal. And yet, within that compromise, Persephone becomes more than a symbol. She becomes a person who learns to stand in two homes without being broken in half. When she is below, she is not only weeping, she listens. She notices the stories of the dead, the way a queen might learn the names of her people. She sees how love, pride, and regret trail behind them like smoke. She discovers that the underworld is not simply punishment. It is also a ledger of truth. Above, she is the bright, returning daughter, the one whose footsteps call buds out of sleep. Below, she is the calm, steady ruler, the one who makes even shadows feel acknowledged. That is why later Greeks could imagine her as a source of comfort, someone you could pray to when you missed the dead, or when you feared becoming forgotten. Her presence suggests that tenderness can exist even where endings live. In this light, Hades becomes less of a villain and more of a boundary, the keeper of the place everyone must face, a stern figure whose realm needs a heart to balance it. Persephone is that heart, and Demeter, watching the cycle repeat, changes too. She does not stop being fierce. She does not stop grieving the months of separation, but she learns the art of letting go in intervals, the way a person learns to unclench a hand without losing what matters. Hecate stays close, not only at the first search, but as a companion in the ongoing pattern, a reminder that support is not a single event. It is a habit. Helios remains the witness, the steady eye that says, "Do not let lies grow in the dark." And Zeus, distant though he often is, becomes the one who must maintain the agreement, because even the gods require rules when love is involved. The myth leaves you with a quiet, human truth. Sometimes you cannot get back the exact life you had, but you can still build a life that holds joy again. And you can learn to live with the seasons of missing. And if you listen for the emotional heartbeat beneath the gods, it sounds surprisingly familiar. A parent learns that love cannot be chained to a single outcome. A child learns that growing up may mean living in two worlds at once, the world of who you were and the world of who you are becoming. The deal between sky and underworld is not romantic, but it is realistic in a mythic way. It admits that life is made of imperfect agreements, and that peace often comes from honoring those agreements day after day. That is why the return of spring feels earned. It is not a lucky accident. It is a promise kept again and again, until the promise itself becomes a kind of shelter. Listen closely, and you will hear the myth speaking in symbols, each one simple enough to carry into your dreams, yet deep enough to last for centuries. The narcissus is one. It is dazzling, yes, but it rises from a bulb hidden underground, and it returns after a season of disappearance. It reminds us that what looks like loss may be only a pause, and that the earth is a place where unseen things prepare. The pomegranate is another. It must be opened to reveal its treasure, and inside it holds many seeds, each one wrapped in a red jewel of sweetness, like a promise that life can multiply even after it has been broken open. The torches matter. 2. Demeter's torches do not defeat darkness. They simply carve out a moving circle of light, enough to take the next step, then the next. That is what searching often feels like in real life. You do not see the whole road. You see the next stone, the next doorway, the next breath, and seeds. Finally, are the myth's quietest symbol, and perhaps the most comforting. A seed is small and dry and unimpressive. It looks like nothing, and yet it contains a pattern, a memory of green, and an impulse toward light. It can wait. It can endure cold. It can sleep through long months without panic. When Demeter withdraws, seeds wait. When Persephone returns, they wake. Ancient listeners turned that rhythm into comfort. If the world can come back from winter, then perhaps a person can come back from grief. So tonight, as you let your thoughts slow, imagine the world as Demeter wanted it. Not flawless, but tended. Imagine a field turned and smoothed, waiting for seed. Imagine a storage jar in a cool room, filled with grain that will feed a family through storms. Imagine Persephone's footsteps on the path back to the surface. Steady, familiar, unhurried. Imagine Hecate's torchlight, warm and low, guiding without rushing you. And if something in you feels like it is still in winter, let the myth offer a gentle promise. Winter is not a verdict. It is a season, and seasons, by their nature, turn. The symbols keep multiplying the longer you look at them. Grain is not just food. It is time made visible. A field is a calendar written in soil. To plant is to believe in a future you cannot yet see. To harvest is to accept help from forces you do not control. Rain, sun, luck, the steady work of insects and unseen roots. That is why the myth feels so natural to bedtime, when you are also surrendering control and trusting that morning will return. Picture the torches again, not as frantic flames, but as a slow-moving procession. Each person carries a small light, and together, those small lights become a path. Picture the pomegranate seeds as tiny points of color, proof that sweetness can be hidden inside something tough. Picture the narcissus as a bright face turned toward the day, and remember that it comes from underground first. If you want, you can turn the myth into a small, calming practice right now. Breathe in slowly, as if you are drawing up warmth from the soil. Hold the breath for a gentle count, as if you are a seed waiting without worry. Then breathe out, as if you are letting winter leave your body in a soft, quiet stream. On the next breath, imagine Persephone stepping into the upper world, and imagine the air changing around her, not with sudden fireworks, but with steady softness. Then imagine Demeter's shoulders lowering just a little, because she knows she will see her daughter again. The myth does not promise that separation never happens. It promises that reunion can still be real, and that love can learn a rhythm that survives distance. So, if your mind is carrying something heavy tonight, let the ancient pattern do some of the work for you. Let it whisper that darkness can be temporary, that waiting can have meaning, and that the turning of seasons is not only out in the world, but also inside you. By the time the tale had been told around Greek hearths for generations, it was no longer only a story about one mother and one daughter. It had become a way of naming the whole cycle of human living. People who planted grain could look at the ground in autumn and feel the sting of absence. Then look again in spring and feel the relief of return. Women in particular found echoes of their own lives in Demeter's fierce refusal to be quiet, and in Persephone's passage from girlhood into a role the world insisted on giving her. Festivals, such as the Thesmophoria, dedicated to Demeter and tied to fertility and agriculture, were led by women and framed as serious communal work rather than mere celebration. The myth allowed them to speak about marriage, childbirth, and separation in a symbolic language that felt both sacred and safe. Even in a society that often limited women's public voice, this story put female experience at the center of cosmic order. It suggested that the earth itself responds to a mother's grief, and that a daughter's return can change the world. That is a startling idea, and it is part of why the tale stayed hot in the imagination instead of cooling into a simple fairy tale. Think of the calendar this myth creates. Autumn becomes not only colder air, but a farewell, a time when Persephone's footsteps turn toward the hidden door. Winter becomes not only snow and dark afternoons, but the long middle of missing, the stretch where grief must learn how to breathe. Spring becomes not only blossoms, but a homecoming. Summer becomes not only heat, but the full season of presence, the months when mother and daughter can laugh without looking over their shoulders. This is why farmers could speak the myth with a kind of practical reverence. They were not treating it as decoration. They were using it as a language for risk. Every seed placed in the ground is a small surrender. You are trusting that what disappears will return. And when it does return, you do not claim you created the miracle alone. You thank the soil, the weather, the steady work of your hands, and the unseen cooperation of the world. Demeter, in the myth, becomes the face of that cooperation. She is the goddess who refuses to let people forget that food is sacred. That bread is a contract between human effort and natural generosity. At the same time, the myth speaks to the inner seasons that do not always match the outer ones. A person can be surrounded by spring and still feel winter inside. A person can be living through a harsh external season and still find a pocket of summer in friendship or memory. Demeter's story makes room for those contradictions. It says, you can love someone and still lose them for a while. You can be furious and still be holy. You can be broken open and still become fruitful. That is a rare kind of permission, and it helps explain why the tale remained meaningful across different regions and eras. In some communities, the myth also offered a protected space for speaking about the complicated cost of marriage. A daughter leaves her mother's house and enters a new household, often with little say in the arrangement. That transition can feel like a descent, even when the new life is not purely cruel. The story admits the ache on both sides, the mother who feels a part of herself has been taken, and the daughter who must become someone new while still longing for the old familiarity. It also hints at a kind of dignity within adaptation. Persephone does not lose her name. Demeter does not stop being Demeter. They negotiate a rhythm that honors both worlds. And that rhythm becomes a model, not only for crops, but for human change. The myth does not say, change is easy. It says, change can be survived. And it can even become meaningful when it is named and shared. That is why communal festivals matter here. When a whole town sings, fasts, laughs, mourns, and then celebrates together, the private pain of one family becomes a public understanding that everyone carries. In that sense, Demeter's gift is not only grain, it is community itself. The knowledge that survival is easier when people move in step. The myth also traveled. Romans told it with different names, with Ceres for Demeter and Proserpina for Persephone. And their poets used it to explain not only seasons, but the hidden logic of empire and law. Artists painted the moment of abduction. Sculptors carved the pomegranate and the torch, and storytellers borrowed its shape whenever they needed to speak about descent and return. Later, myths and legends echo it. The hero who goes down and comes back changed. The lover who crosses a boundary. The living person who tries to rescue the dead and discovers that rescue has rules. You can even feel it beneath stories that have nothing to do with Greek gods. Whenever a narrative insists that darkness has meaning, and that the surface world cannot stay bright without acknowledging what lies below. In that sense, Demeter and Persephone become more than characters. They become a map. Demeter is the part of us that refuses to accept numbness as normal. Persephone is the part of us that learns how to carry memory without being swallowed by it. Hades is the boundary we cannot negotiate away. The certainty that every life ends, and Zeus is the impersonal force of balance. The reminder that even love must move within the limits of the world. The story does not ask you to like those limits. It asks you to live honestly inside them. Because it traveled so well, the story also grew new layers. Some storytellers emphasize abduction and injustice, turning the myth into a warning about power and the way beauty can be hunted. Others emphasize negotiation, focusing on the moment when even the king of the gods must listen to a mother who will not be silenced. Others emphasize the underworld itself, treating Persephone as a figure of transformation, someone who learns to rule the place everyone fears. Each emphasis changes the flavor, but the core remains descent and return, separation and reunion, loss and the possibility of renewal. That core is so sturdy that it can survive retelling in many tones, from tragedy to gentle instruction. It can also survive being used as metaphor. People have used it to talk about the experience of growing up, when childhood ends abruptly and you feel as if the ground has opened. They have used it to talk about migration and exile, when a person must live part of the year in one world and part in another, never fully belonging to only one. They have used it to talk about depression, when a mind sinks below the surface and returns later with a new steadiness. They have used it to talk about grief, when the beloved is gone and then, gradually, life begins to grow again around the empty place. And they have used it to talk about love that matures, love that stops demanding perfect control and learns to keep promises instead. So when you hear Demeter and Persephone now, you are not only hearing ancient gods, you are hearing a pattern that people keep finding inside themselves. Because it fits the way real life moves, because the pattern is so universal. Later, storytellers could borrow single images and still carry the whole meaning. A hand reaching down, a wrist being pulled upward, a torch reflected in black water, a split fruit with bright seeds. Even when a painting or a poem shows only the abduction, viewers often feel the rest of the cycle humming behind it, because they know that stories, like seasons, keep turning. The myth also invites a gentle moral without preaching power that refuses to listen will eventually face consequences. And love that refuses to bargain can become destructive. Demeter's strike saves her daughter, but it also nearly destroys mortals. Zeus's compromise restores the world, but it still leaves an ache. So the story quietly suggests balance as a form of compassion, not the cold balance of arithmetic, but the living balance of a tree that bends in wind so it does not break. When people keep retelling it, they keep searching for that bend, for a way to protect what they love while still accepting the limits of reality. In this way, Demeter and Persephone become teachers of maturity, not in a stern sense, but in a tender sense. They show how love can remain intense and still grow wiser over time. For a bedtime listener, that honesty can feel surprisingly soothing. The myth does not demand constant happiness. It allows for seasons of waiting. Seasons when the heart feels like a field under frost. And it also insists that waiting is not wasted time. Under the soil, roots are doing their silent work. Under the surface of your own mind, thoughts can settle and rearrange. If you imagine Persephone in the underworld, do not imagine endless terror. Imagine a quiet room where she sits with steadiness, learning, listening, becoming more herself. If you imagine Demeter in winter, do not imagine weakness. Imagine a powerful being who loves so deeply that she will not pretend. Then imagine the turn, slow and reliable, as Persephone rises and Demeter's world softens again. Tonight you can borrow that turn as a comfort. Let your worries be winter for a little while, not a final sentence. Just a season. Let your body be the earth, heavy in a good way, supported and held. And if you wake later in the night, remember the torches, small lights, patient lights, enough for the next step. The myth has walked beside people for thousands of years because it offers a simple, sheltering thought: love can survive absence, and the world can come back. If you want to stay with the story for a few more minutes, let it become a soft landscape in your imagination. Picture a wide plain under a quiet night sky. The air is cool, but not harsh. Somewhere in the distance, a torch moves. A small glow that does not shout. It simply exists. With each slow breath, let that glow come a little closer. Not rushing, not demanding attention, just offering direction. Now, picture a doorway in the earth. Not a frightening pit, but a threshold with steps worn smooth by time. Persephone stands at the bottom of those steps with calm eyes, holding the memory of darkness without being afraid of it. She begins to climb, and with each step the air becomes gentler. The scent of soil turns into the scent of leaves. The silence turns into the sound of distant birds. At the top, Demeter waits, not in panic this time, but in readiness, as if she has learned that hope can be practiced. They meet, and nothing dramatic has to happen. A simple embrace is enough to change the season. Let that image settle in you. Let it say that reunions do not always arrive with noise. Sometimes they arrive as quiet relief. The moment you notice, your jaw has unclenched. Sometimes spring is a single ordinary day when you realize you have laughed again. And when sleep finally comes, let it feel like Persephone's descent in reverse, not a fall, but a gentle going inward. A safe underworld of rest where your body repairs itself. You will return in the morning, as she does, and the world will still be here, waiting with its own small green promises. As you lie here now, you do not have to solve anything in your life tonight. You only have to rest. Let the myth's rhythm do what lullabies do best, which is to remind the nervous system that patterns can be trusted. If a thought tries to pull you into worry, treat it like a cloud crossing the moon. Notice it, then let it pass. Return to the image of the field. Return to the feel of a torch's warmth. Return to the simple idea of a seed waiting safely in the dark. You can even imagine Demeter walking the edge of a sleeping town, not as a terrifying goddess, but as a guardian of stores and gardens, making sure there will be enough. Imagine Persephone below as a calm queen who watches over dreams, keeping the underworld of sleep orderly and gentle. In that frame, night is not an enemy. Night is part of the bargain, the half of the cycle that makes morning sweeter. And when you drift off, you are not losing yourself. You are simply stepping into a quiet season, and you will return. One last image, if you want it. Imagine you are holding a single pomegranate seed between your fingers. Tiny, smooth, and bright. It represents a promise that is small enough to keep, even on a hard day. Not a promise to be perfect. Not a promise to never feel sad. Just a promise that you will keep turning toward light when you can. Place that seed in your mind, into the soil of this night. Let sleep cover it like a warm blanket. Trust that nothing important is lost in the dark. It is only resting. And with that thought, allow your breathing to slow again, and let the story fade the way a torch fades at dawn, leaving behind a gentle warmth. Even so, the myth never pretends that the underworld is a place you can visit lightly. It is not a tourist road. It is the border where every certainty loosens, where names become echoes, where even a strong heart has to slow down and listen. Ancient Greeks imagined it with rivers and gates and judges. But underneath the geography is a feeling, the feeling of stepping into a room where the past waits quietly, and where the future is no longer a loud promise. If you follow Persephone there in your mind, you can picture the shift at the moment she crosses the threshold. The air changes. The sound changes. Even colors feel as if they have been washed and folded away. Some storytellers place a cavern mouth in the hillside. Others, a crack in a meadow. Others, a lake whose surface looks like polished stone. But however it opens the same way suddenly, like a hidden door in a familiar world. One step, and the rules are different. The Greeks gave that world borders, not to make it cute, but to make it graspable. There is the river Styx, dark and slow, and the ferry of Charon that does not move without a fee. There is the river Lethe that softens memory until it becomes mist. There is the river of fire, Phlegethon, and the river of lamentation, Cocytus. There are fields of asphodel where ordinary souls drift, not tortured, not triumphant, simply quiet, like shadows moving through tall, pale flowers. There are the deeper places, too, where those who broke sacred laws in violent, spectacular ways are held by their own consequences. And there are guardians Cerberus at the gate, 3 throats and 1 duty, to keep the boundary intact. In this older imagination, the underworld is not only fear, it is order. It is the fact that every living thing eventually meets a limit. Inside that order, Persephone is what makes the myth feel strangely comforting instead of only grim. She is not merely the lost girl. She becomes the one who can speak to both sides. She can stand in the sunlight of grain fields and also sit on a throne of shadow. She can greet her mother with warm hands and also hear the soft chorus of the dead without flinching. That is why later poets keep giving her 2 titles Chore, the maiden, and Persephone, the queen. The underworld teaches her what Demeter cannot. Demeter can teach growth, nourishment, and the language of seasons. But Demeter cannot teach how to face endings without collapsing, because her own grief proves she struggles. In the underworld, Persephone meets the truth that every life is finite, and that finiteness does not cancel meaning. She sees heroes who once glittered in songs, now quiet as stones. She sees ordinary people too, whose names were never carved into marble, yet whose loves and fears were just as real. The myth does not say she becomes numb. It suggests she becomes steady. She grows into a form of power that is not loud power, but calm authority. The kind that comes from looking at the hardest truth and not turning away. If you listen closely to how the ancients describe it, you notice they keep returning to the idea of balance. The underworld is not an enemy of life. It is the other half of life, the part that makes every harvest precious because it will not last forever. That is why the story pairs Demeter's blazing search with the dim, disciplined calm below. Demeter walks the earth with a torch, and in some tellings Hecate joins her. 2 lights moving across the night, like patient stars. Those torches are not only for finding a daughter, they are also for insisting that love does not stop at the border of loss. And when Persephone is finally found, she has already begun to understand that the world is larger than any one season, larger than any one feeling. She has seen how the dead are not monsters, but people who have finished their stories. She has seen how grief can be endless if it is fed, and how it can also become quiet if it is honored and then allowed to settle. That is a hard lesson, but it is also a gentle one, because it means there is a way to endure. Think, too, of the pomegranate, the small red law that binds Persephone to the underworld. In a literal sense, it is a trick, a bit of mythic legalism, a food eaten that makes a place your home. But symbolically, it is richer. A pomegranate is packed with seeds, with life held in a tight, jeweled cage. It is sweet, but not simple. It stains your fingers. It asks you to accept that pleasure and consequence can touch the same moment. In the hymn, Persephone does not eat a whole feast. She eats a few seeds. The story is careful about that. A little is enough to change your status. Many people have had that kind of moment. One decision, one sentence, one night, one loss, one love. And suddenly your life has a new chapter that cannot be unwritten. You are still you, but you are also marked by what you have tasted. The myth gives that truth a fruit you can hold in your imagination, something bright against the dark. You can even feel, in the way the myth is told, that the pomegranate is the symbol of a compromise that hurts and heals at the same time. Demeter wants her daughter entirely. The underworld wants its queen entirely. The world itself cannot survive if either demand is absolute. So the fruit becomes a calendar, a few seeds, a few months, not forever, not never. The myth is quietly realistic in that way. It admits that sometimes the best outcome is not perfect. It is workable, and it is chosen again and again as the seasons repeat. That is why Persephone's return is not presented as a reset button. It is a reunion that includes everything that happened in between. When she rises, she brings a trace of the underworld with her, a seriousness in her eyes. When she descends, she brings a trace of the upper world with her, a memory of wheat and sunlight, like warmth carried in the pocket of a cloak. In that exchange, both realms become more human. It is also easy to imagine Hades as a villain because the surface of the tale is a kidnapping. Yet in older Greek religion, Hades is the keeper of boundaries, not a devil with a whip. He is also the god of wealth, because everything precious comes from the ground metal, gems, fertile soil, and the hidden roots that keep a tree alive. Punishments exist in Greek myth, yes, but they are not the center of the underworld. For most souls, the underworld is simply where the story ends and becomes memory. Hades embodies that finality. He does not argue with fate. He does not bargain with time. He is not cruel in a loud way. He is unmoved. And because he is unmoved, Persephone's presence changes the atmosphere of his realm. She brings a hint of rhythm, a reminder that the world above still turns, that seeds still split, that mothers still wait. Some hymns and later stories suggest she can grant a gentler hearing to those who appeal to her. She becomes, in a way, the face of empathy within inevitability, the one who understands sorrow because she has lived it on both sides. If you imagine her seated beside Hades, do not picture only cold marble. Picture the kind of stillness you feel in a deep cave, where the drip of water is the only clock. Persephone listens. She weighs. She learns which griefs are loud and which griefs are quiet, which regrets are sharp and which are dull with repetition. She learns that some pain cannot be fixed by rushing, and that some healing is simply time passing in darkness. That learning is part of why her return matters. When she comes back to Demeter, she is not the same girl who picked flowers in a bright field. She is wider. She can hold more. She has been tempered the way metal is tempered, not by being praised, but by being tested, because the Greeks told many stories about descending and returning. Persephone's myth also became a template for hope, but a hope with discipline. Consider Orpheus, who goes down for Eurydice, carrying music as his torch. He charms the rulers below, and he is granted a chance that feels almost impossible to lead his love back into daylight. On one condition that is simple and unbearable: do not look back until you have both crossed the final threshold. Orpheus fails at the last instant, because doubt bites him, and his longing becomes a trap. His story ends painfully. Yet even that failure teaches something that matches Demeter's lesson. Some laws are not cruel. They are simply the shape of reality. And impatience is one of the fastest ways to turn longing into loss. Or think of Heracles, who wrestles Cerberus without weapons, proving strength can be restraint. Or think of Theseus, who goes down and gets trapped, showing that some descents are not meant for certain hearts, or that timing matters. Set beside Persephone, these tales form a constellation of warnings and comforts. Yes, darkness is real. Yes, grief is real. But there are also paths of return, and there are guides. In Eleusis, that idea was gathered into the mysteries. People walked in procession carrying sacred objects, fasting, laughing, weeping, and finally entering the telesterion, the hall of initiation, where the secret was revealed not as a lecture, but as an experience. We cannot say exactly what they saw, because they chose silence, and because secrecy was part of the medicine. Yet we can guess the shape of it. They likely saw symbols of grain and birth and burial. They likely heard a story told in darkness and then witnessed light. Perhaps a sudden blaze. Perhaps a lamp lifted high. Perhaps a single ear of wheat shone at the right moment. Whatever the exact details, the result is recorded indirectly. Initiates spoke of leaving the ritual with a steadier courage about death. They did not claim to escape mortality. They claimed to fear it less. They felt, in their bones, that the world's cycle held them even when they were gone. All of this might sound grand, and Bedtime asks for gentleness. So bring it back to the scale of a breathing body in a quiet room. Think of how sleep itself is a small descent. The lights go out. Your thoughts slow. The loud voice of daytime fades. You enter an inner underworld of dreams, where people you have lost might appear, where old memories move like shadows, where emotions speak in symbols. It can be unsettling, but it is also where your mind does its deep work. The Persephone story gives you a way to trust that descent. You can tell yourself, as you soften into the pillow, that you are not falling into chaos. You are crossing a threshold that countless humans have crossed before. And like Persephone, you can return. So tonight, picture a doorway. On one side is the day you have just lived. On the other side is the night, cool and quiet. You do not need to fear the doorway. You can step through gently. Imagine hymns, not as a stern god, but as a friendly guide, leading you not into danger but into rest, reminding you that every journey has a path back. Imagine Hecate's torches not as flames that burn, but as warm points of safety in the dark. Imagine Persephone taking her seat in the underworld with calm composure, as if she is saying, I can be here, and it does not erase who I am. Then imagine her later, stepping upward again, feeling the temperature rise, hearing birds return, watching the first green blade break through soil. The myth is not telling you that pain is an illusion. It is telling you that pain is not permanent. It is telling you that even endings can be held in a larger rhythm. When you hold that thought, your breath can deepen, your shoulders can loosen, and your mind can let go of the need to keep watch. The cycle is still turning, and you are allowed to rest. And if you have ever worried that resting means you are failing to control your life, the myth offers a kinder interpretation. In the underworld, control is an illusion, but meaning is not. Meaning comes from the way you meet what is here. So as you settle into bed, you can practice the Persephone skill, letting the mind notice a thought and then letting it pass like a shadow across a wall. If a memory appears, you do not have to chase it. If a fear appears, you do not have to wrestle it. You can acknowledge it the way a queen might acknowledge a visitor, with calm attention. And then you can let it move on. Picture the fields above, sleeping under a winter sky, and know that they are not dead. They are resting. Picture the seeds in the ground, held in darkness, and know that they are not lost. They are waiting. Your own body can do the same. Your muscles can soften. Your jaw can unclench. Your hands can open. Just like the myth, your night can be a promise of return. A quiet agreement between what you must release and what will come back to you in time. If you like, let the last image be simple. Persephone's footsteps on the upward path, steady and unhurried, and Demeter waiting without panic, trusting the rhythm. With that trust, you can drift now, the way a field drifts into winter sleep. By the time the cycle has repeated a few times, you start to notice that the myth is not really about a single dramatic event. It is about living with a pattern. Demeter does not win once and then relax forever. Persephone does not return once and then stay forever. The story insists on repetition, because that is what real life feels like. We learn a lesson, and then we have to learn it again in a new form. We grieve, and then we grieve again. Sometimes for the same thing. Sometimes for something different. Sometimes for a version of ourselves that has changed. This is why the myth endured for centuries in songs and festivals. It gave people language for the way time circles back. In a farming world, the pattern was literal seed time and harvest, barrenness and bloom. In a human heart, the pattern is emotional closeness and distance, certainty and doubt, hope and heaviness. The Demeter and Persephone story does not call any of these feelings shameful. It treats them as seasons, and seasons are not moral failures. They are movements. The festival calendar itself carried their story. In some places, women gathered for the Thesmophoria, sleeping away from home, sharing jokes and laments, throwing offerings into pits, and later retrieving the decayed remains to mix with seed grain, as if the underworld could feed the harvest. Whether every detail was the same everywhere, the shape is clear. The myth was not only heard, it was practiced. People acted out, in small symbolic ways. The idea that what goes down can nourish what comes up. Even the city-state, so proud and noisy, had to admit that its survival depended on that quiet truth. Athenians could argue in the assembly all day, but they still needed bread. And bread begins with a seed that disappears into dark soil. You can also see why the story mattered so much to women in particular. In a world where childbirth was dangerous and marriage could feel like a leaving, Persephone's descent and return spoke in a language that daily life understood. A daughter leaves her mother's house. A mother worries. A daughter becomes someone new in a new realm. The bond stretches, but does not break. That is not a neat, sentimental theme. It is a hard truth wrapped in myth, and it offered a kind of solidarity. To tell the story was to say this ache has been felt before, and it did not end the world. It reshaped the world. Yes, but reshaping is not the same as destruction. Artists kept returning to the same images for that reason. Vase painters loved the moment of reunion. Demeter and Persephone facing each other, hands almost touching, as if time pauses to watch. Poets loved the moment of negotiation, when even Zeus has to listen to a mother's grief. Farmers loved the simple outcome grain returns. Families loved the deeper outcome. There is a way to speak of loss without falling apart. All of these layers sit inside the myth at once, and that is why it can meet you where you are. Whether you are thinking about the cycles of a year or the cycles of a heart. At Elosis, those movements were made tangible. People walked together, not as isolated sufferers, but as a community that admitted, openly, that everyone is bound to loss. They carried sacred objects. They fasted. They drank the kykeon. They listened to chants, and then they entered darkness. Not darkness as entertainment, but darkness as a shared human fact. Then, at the right moment, light returned. The point was not to pretend that death is trivial. The point was to show that life is larger than any single ending. When you step back, you can see how quietly radical that is. The myth does not promise that you will never lose. It promises that losing will not erase you. Demeter is not told to stop loving. Persephone is not told to forget. Instead, they build an agreement that allows love to continue across a boundary. That agreement is what makes spring possible. In a way, it is also what makes peace possible. It is the moment the story turns from rage to rhythm. This is also where the myth becomes surprisingly modern. Many people today know what it is like to feel split between two worlds. You might have a public self and a private self. You might have the version of you who performs well in daylight and the version of you who lies awake at night, staring into thoughts you do not share. Persephone is the figure who makes that split feel less like a weakness. She is proof that you can belong to more than one realm and still be whole. Demeter, too, is proof that love can be fierce without being foolish. Her anger is not petty. It is an insistence that what is precious should be treated as precious. The story does not punish her for caring. It shows that caring deeply can change the world, even if it also hurts. If you have ever felt that tenderness makes you vulnerable, Demeter and Persephone offer a counterpoint. Tenderness is also the force that makes life grow. There is a small detail in the hymn that often gets overlooked because the drama of the abduction is so loud. After Demeter is reunited with her daughter, she does not simply walk away. She teaches humanity agriculture. She gives people a way to survive winter. In other words, she turns private grief into public knowledge. That is a beautiful move, and it hints at something wise. Suffering, when it is not denied, can become a source of skill. Not a skill that makes suffering good, but a skill that makes suffering meaningful. People who have been through darkness sometimes learn how to guide others through darkness. They learn patience. They learn how to speak softly. They learn how to wait for spring without demanding that it arrive on a schedule. In the myth, Demeter becomes that kind of teacher. When you notice that, Demeter's gift of agriculture becomes more than a nice ending. It becomes the proof that the gods in this story are not distant. They are tied to daily work. To plant is to trust a descent. To bake bread is to turn hidden growth into something warm you can hold. Even the smallest loaf carries the logic of Demeter patience, care, and a faith that the dark can produce nourishment. That is why the myth could be told at a hearth as easily as in a temple. It belonged to hands that knead dough and hands that wipe tears. And Persephone becomes a different kind of teacher, one whose lessons are quieter. She teaches that you can stand near endings without being swallowed by them. She teaches that some parts of life have no bright language, and that is okay. You do not need to decorate the underworld. You just need to respect it. When she descends, she is not surrendering to despair. She is fulfilling a balance that keeps both realms honest. When she rises, she is not escaping reality. She is returning to it with added depth. That depth is the real gift of the myth. It offers a way to imagine growth that includes shadow. It says, in effect, that maturity is not the absence of darkness, but the ability to walk through darkness without losing your name. Persephone's quieter lessons show up in the way people prayed to her. She was asked to be gentle. She was asked to listen. She was asked to help the dead, and also to protect the living from premature endings. She could be invoked at graves, but also at thresholds, and even at weddings, because she understood the feeling of crossing into a new identity. In later tradition, she is sometimes paired with Hecate, another torchbearer at the edges, another figure who knows how to stand between worlds. Together, they form a kind of map for anyone who has ever felt in between childhood and adulthood, between one home and another, between a past self and a future self. The myth does not shame that in-between space. It treats it as sacred, because it is where transformation happens. And transformation, in this story, is not only personal, it is ecological. The earth responds to emotion. That is a poetic idea, of course, but it points to a practical truth. Human moods and human choices affect the world around us. When Demeter withdraws, people starve. When she returns to her work, people eat. The myth is telling you that care is not a soft luxury. Care is a survival force. If you have ever felt that your small acts of care do not matter, imagine Demeter's hands scattering seed, and remember that life is built from repeated, humble emotions. If you want one more image to hold, picture the moment of transition itself. The path upward is not a sudden leap. It is gradual. The air warms in tiny increments. The stone walls lighten. The first scent of soil appears. Then the first scent of green. Persephone keeps walking at the same pace, neither rushing nor resisting. That pace is important. It suggests that change does not have to be dramatic to be real. In your own life, this might look like a single kinder thought, a small habit that supports you, a quiet decision to stop fighting the night. Demeter's lesson is to keep loving. Persephone's lesson is to keep moving. Together they create a life that is not perfect, but is sustainable. Now, as we reach the end of this telling, let the myth soften into something almost like a lullaby. Outside your window, the modern world still exists, with its noise and schedules and bright screens. But you do not have to carry it into the night. Tonight you can choose the older rhythm, the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. Imagine the earth itself, vast and patient, turning under the stars. Imagine the fields resting. Imagine the seas settling. Somewhere in the imagination, Demeter has put away her frantic torch, not because she no longer cares, but because she can trust the agreement. Persephone, too, knows where she belongs at each point of the cycle. That knowledge is a kind of safety. So give your body permission to follow the same logic. Let your eyelids grow heavy, the way winter clouds grow thick. Let your thoughts slow, the way a river slows as it widens. If a worry appears, you can picture it as a seed. You do not need to crack it open right now. You can place it in the soil of sleep. If a memory appears, you can treat it gently, the way Persephone might treat a visiting shade acknowledged, not clung to. And if you feel lonely, remember that this myth was told by countless voices across centuries, in homes and temples and quiet gatherings, because it spoke to a shared human experience. The fact that you have seasons inside you means you are not broken. It means you are alive. To help that rhythm settle into you, you can do something very simple. On an inhale, imagine the world above ground, the open sky, the gentle rise of the chest. On an exhale, imagine the safe darkness of soil, the heavy calm, the release of effort. Let your breathing move like Persephone's journey, down and up, without struggle. Notice your forehead and allow it to smooth. Notice your eyes and allow them to rest in their sockets. Notice your tongue and let it lie soft. Notice your shoulders and let them sink as if they have finally been given permission. Notice your hands and let the fingers loosen. Notice your belly and let it rise and fall without being held in. Notice your legs and let them feel heavy, supported by the bed the way roots are supported by earth. Then, if your mind tries to plan tomorrow, you can answer it gently, not now. Tomorrow is the upper world. Right now is the quiet realm where nothing has to be solved. Persephone did not negotiate with the underworld by panicking. She sat. She listened. She accepted what was true and refused what was unnecessary. You can do the same with thoughts. Accept that they exist. Refuse to chase them. Let them drift past like distant footsteps in a hallway, fading as you move deeper into rest. And if you wake in the night, remember the myth again. Waking is not failure. It is simply part of a cycle. You can picture Demeter watching the winter sky and trusting that spring will arrive. Even if she cannot see it yet, you can picture Persephone in the dark, calm, not alone, waiting for the moment of return. With that image, you can let yourself sink back down, confident that you are held by a rhythm older than any worry. In a moment, you can let the story fade. You do not need to hold every detail. The feeling is enough. A mother who searched, a daughter who changed, a world that learned to bloom again. If you want to end with a final picture, see Persephone standing at the edge of a spring field, touching a new blade of grass with her fingertips, then turning to walk forward, calm and certain, and see Demeter beside her, not triumphant, not defeated, simply present. With that steady presence, let your own breath become slow and deep. Let the day release you. Let the night hold you. Let sleep arrive like spring, quietly, in its own time. Sleep can be your gentle spring tonight, arriving without force. When it comes, let it take you, and let the story watch over you in silence. Tonight, as the myth settles, another layer rises softly to the surface. And it is the layer that makes the story feel less like distant gods and more like a mirror held close to the human heart. Demeter is not only the goddess of grain and green fields, she is the part of you that refuses to give up on what you love. The instinct that says, keep looking, keep calling the name, keep walking, even when the road is long. Persephone is not only a queen beneath the earth. She is the part of you that learns to adapt when life drops you into an unfamiliar season, and the part of you that returns changed, wiser, carrying something you did not have before. In the myth, their bond is so strong that the natural world responds to it. When Persephone is taken, the earth tightens like a living body. It protects itself. It conserves. Seeds do not stir. Leaves do not unfurl. And fields go dull and quiet. When Persephone returns, the world relaxes and opens. And that opening is not just beauty. It is relief. If you have ever noticed how your own body responds to fear or grief, you already understand this pattern. In tense times, you hold your breath without realizing. Your shoulders rise, your jaw clenches, and your thoughts race as if they must patrol the dark. In safer times, you soften. Your breath becomes deeper, and your attention can rest on simple things. A blanket, a lamp, the sound of a distant fan, the weight of your own hands. The seasons in this story can be read as the seasons of the nervous system. Sometimes you are in summer, open and generous. Sometimes you are in winter, pulled inward and quiet. The myth does not shame winter. It explains it. It says, there are times when the body must conserve, when the soul must go underground to do its work, and bedtime is a small, daily invitation into that winter room. The day closes its doors, the world dims, and you are allowed to stop blooming for a while. Nothing has to be proven at night. Nothing has to be fixed in the next 10 minutes. You can be like the seed that rests in the soil, not dead, just waiting, gathering strength for the next return. Imagine the year as a house with 4 rooms. Spring is a bright room with open windows and the scent of wet earth. Summer is a warm room full of movement and long light. Autumn is a room with golden shadows and the feeling of harvest, of gathering what matters. Winter is the quiet room with thick curtains and slow clocks, the room that teaches you how to rest without guilt. In that winter room, you do not fail because you are not producing. You are simply resting, repairing, and listening. Demeter, in her grief, is forced into that room, and the world follows her. Because the world in the story is honest, love and loss are not private. They change everything. You may have your own small winters, days when you feel less bright, less eager, less certain. The myth offers a kind of permission slip. It says that withdrawal is sometimes wisdom, not weakness. It also reminds you that winter is not a life sentence. Winter is a chapter. Winter has an ending built into it, even when you cannot see the date on the calendar. So as you lie here, you can let the day be over. You can stop negotiating with it. You can tell your mind, gently, that you are allowed to pause. A thought that arrives can be treated like a leaf that falls on the snow. You notice it, and then you let it settle. Another thought can fall beside it, and settle too. Slowly the ground becomes quiet. Not empty, just quiet enough for sleep to do its work. Even the underworld in the myth can be seen as a place of deep processing. Like the mind in sleep, in the dark soil, roots spread, and in the dark mind, memories are sorted and emotions are softened. You do not need to supervise any of it. You only need to let yourself sink into stillness. The way a stone sinks into a riverbed and becomes part of the calm. If the day has left you restless, picture Demeter finally lowering her torch for a moment and letting the night air cool her hands. Picture the fields under starlight, waiting, not anxious. Picture yourself as one of those fields, simply present, not rushing, not demanding, letting the darkness be gentle. Rest is not the opposite of life. Rest is the hidden part of life, the part that makes the next morning possible. There is also a lesson in time itself, and it is gentle. Sorrow can last longer than you want, and that does not mean you are broken. In the ancient hymn, Demeter's grief stretches into a wandering that feels endless. Days blur into nights. She moves from place to place in disguise, asking questions, listening at doorways, searching the edges of the world. She refuses nectar and ambrosia, refusing the bright comforts that might numb her too quickly. The story is honest about stubbornness like that. Sometimes comfort offered too early feels insulting, as if it tries to erase what mattered. And Demeter insists that the loss is real by refusing to pretend she is fine. In a strange way, that refusal is a form of love. Yet the myth also shows that grief does not have to be the final ruler. Help arrives in careful steps. First, there is Hecate, who hears the cry and does not dismiss it. She cannot solve the mystery alone, but she bears witness, and witness is a kind of lantern. Then there is Helios, the sun, who sees what others miss. He tells Demeter the truth. Hades has taken Persephone, and Zeus has allowed it. Notice the order of these helpers. One hears, one sees, one speaks. When you are overwhelmed, you often need the same sequence. You need something that hears you, something that helps you see clearly, and then words that name what is happening. Demeter does not accept the arrangement quietly. She confronts power. She stops the growth of the world, not as a tantrum, but as leverage. Without the harvest, gods and mortals both feel hunger, and hunger forces the truth into the open. At last, the bargain is made, and it is not a perfect bargain. Persephone may return, but the pomegranate seeds matter. Those small red seeds are like a signature on a contract, like a boundary that cannot be ignored. They say that experiences leave traces. They say that you cannot always go back to who you were before. Persephone becomes two things at once: daughter of the meadow and queen of the underworld. She belongs to the upper world for part of the year, and to the lower world for another part. This is not portrayed as failure. It is portrayed as rhythm. The myth does not demand that she choose only one identity. It allows her to be complex. That complexity is comforting, because life often makes us complex too. You can be brave and tired. You can be grateful and grieving. You can be moving forward and still missing what you lost. The pomegranate teaches that winter is not only imposed from outside, it is sometimes invited by the deep self. The seed is sweet, and it is also binding. It tastes like desire, like curiosity, like the willingness to know what is below the surface. So when your own life enters a quieter season, you do not have to interpret it as a punishment. You can interpret it as a chapter of learning, a period when your roots are growing where no one can see them. And when the season shifts again, you can allow yourself to return without apology. You do not owe anyone a performance of constant spring. Even the compromise between Demeter and Zeus holds a subtle kind of mercy. It admits that some things cannot be undone. Yet, it still creates space for joy to return. That is how healing often looks. It is not a clean erasure of the past. It is a new arrangement with the past, a way of carrying it that does not crush you. Think of Persephone walking both roads. When she rises, she carries knowledge of shadows, and that knowledge makes her less naive and more steady. When she descends, she carries memory of sunlight, and that memory keeps her from forgetting that warmth exists. You can do something similar with your own thoughts tonight. If a worry visits, you can notice it as knowledge from the underworld, information about what you care about. Then you can also notice the counterweight, the memory of the times you managed, the times you endured and came back. Cycles work because they include both. If you tried to stay only in brightness, the brightness would lose meaning. If you stayed only in darkness, you would forget your way out. The myth offers balance, a planned return, a promise built into the calendar. And that promise can be borrowed by the mind at bedtime. You can tell yourself, quietly, that you do not have to solve everything tonight. You can let the night hold the questions, the way the earth holds seeds. You can release the need to be finished and allow yourself to be in process. One of the quietest moments in the myth is the moment of hospitality, because it shows how tenderness can enter even when grief is still present. Demeter arrives at Eleusis weary, disguised as an old woman, and she sits by a well with her sorrow like a heavy cloak. The daughters of the local king find her. They do not know she is divine, yet they recognize the shape of exhaustion. They speak kindly. They offer her a place in their home, a seat by the hearth, and the simple dignity of being welcomed without being interrogated. In some tellings, Demeter accepts a cup of barley and water, flavored with mint, a humble drink that fits a humble disguise. The detail is small, but it matters. It says that comfort does not have to be grand to be real. Inside the palace, she becomes a nurse to the infant Demeter. And for a moment, the myth leans toward healing. Demeter pours her care into the child, and in her divine way she tries to burn away his mortality, holding him in the cleansing fire at night. But the child's mother cries out in fear, and the ritual breaks. Demeter reveals herself, not in anger so much as in truth, and she asks for a temple to be built so that humans can honor her properly. That scene is strange and beautiful, because it shows the limits of even a goddess in the face of human panic. It also shows that the path back from loss often passes through misunderstanding. People may not understand the way you are trying to heal. You may not understand the way they react. Still, something good is born there. The promise of ritual. The promise that grief can be held inside a story, inside a practice, inside a community that remembers. The Eleusinian rites that later grew from this myth were secret, but the feeling behind them is easy to sense. They offered people a way to face the dark seasons without despair, a way to believe that descent and return are part of the same sacred pattern. Now you can borrow a quiet piece of that pattern for your own small ritual of sleep. Let your bed be your Eleusis, a safe house on the edge of the fields. Let your blanket be Demeter's cloak laid down at last. Bring your attention to your breathing. Inhale, as if you are taking one steady step upward with Persephone. Exhale as if you are setting down a torch that has been carried too long. Inhale again, and imagine Hermes walking beside you, calm and sure, guiding you through the boundary between waking and sleeping. Exhale again, and imagine the threshold widening, becoming gentle, becoming easy to cross. If thoughts arrive, you do not have to chase them into the night. You can treat them like the pomegranate seeds in your palm, small, bright, and not urgent. You can acknowledge them, and then let them go one by one, dropping them into the dark soil where they can wait. Picture the seasons as rooms in a house. Tonight you are entering the winter room, not as exile, but as care. The curtains are drawn. The air is cool and clean. The clock is slow. In this room, you do not have to impress anyone. Let your shoulders sink. Let your jaw loosen. Let your eyes rest behind their lids. Let the muscles around your mouth soften, as if you are quietly forgiven. And remember, even in the myth, winter is never the end. Winter is the pause that allows the return, so you can rest now with confidence that the world knows how to turn, and you know how to turn with it. Sleep can come like Persephone coming home, not forced, not rushed, simply arriving when the gates are ready to open. Notice the weight of your body against the mattress. Notice how the bed supports you without asking for anything in return. Listen for the softest sounds in the room, the distant hum of electricity, the faint movement of air, the small creak of a settling building. Let these sounds be like night insects in the fields, steady and harmless. If you like, count your breaths in a slow cycle, 4 on the inhale and 6 on the exhale, not as a rule, but as a lullaby. Each longer exhale is an offering to the winter room, a signal to the body that it can stand down from guarding. With each breath, imagine the surface world growing quieter and the underworld growing kinder. Not a place of punishment, but a place of deep rest where nothing can chase you. Let the myth hold the story now. You do not need to hold it. You can drift. And when you drift, you are following the oldest rhythm of all descent into sleep. Return to morning. By this point in the tale, it can be comforting to look at Persephone not only as someone who was taken, but as someone who becomes. The underworld is often painted as pure gloom. Yet in many Greek imaginings, it is also orderly, quiet, and strangely calm, a place where the loud demands of the surface do not reach. Persephone learns its paths, the pale meadows of asphodel, the rivers that mark boundaries, the halls where the dead are not tormented by fire but simply live without hunger or hurry. She does not cease to miss the sun, but she also discovers that she can stand in shadow without losing herself. That is the heart of her transformation. She is not erased by darkness. She is strengthened by it. The pomegranate seeds, bright as rubies, become a symbol of that strength. They are not only a trap, they are a reminder that experience is consumed and absorbed, that it becomes part of your blood and bone. Even if the choice was not fully hers in the beginning, the story gradually grants her agency through the role she grows into. She is called Queen, not because she is imprisoned, but because she learns the language of that realm and carries authority within it. And that authority changes the tone of the myth. It turns the underworld from a place she is dragged into a place she can enter and leave according to a rhythm. A place where she holds a key. In life, you may have places you did not choose, responsibilities that arrived like winter, emotions that pulled you underground. The Persephone part of you is the part that adapts, that says, if I must be here, I will learn. I will become capable. I will find what is mine even in this landscape. That is not surrender to harm. It is resilience. It is the quiet decision to keep your center while the world changes around you. Some tellers soften Hades, making him less a villain and more a stern keeper of boundaries. Others keep him fearsome, a reminder that the world contains powers that do not ask permission. Either way, the myth uses him to show that boundaries are real. The underworld is not a place you visit casually, and neither is sleep. Both require a kind of threshold crossing, and thresholds ask for respect. When Persephone becomes queen, she does not deny the boundary. She honors it. She learns when to speak and when to be silent, when to accept and when to insist. In that sense, she becomes a teacher of balance. Balance is not 50% joy and 50% sorrow. Balance is knowing how to move between them without getting lost. It is the ability to say, this is a hard season, and also, I will not let it define my whole year. If you have felt the swing between high-energy days and low-energy days, between social warmth and private withdrawal, you have already lived a version of her story. Persephone teaches that you do not have to label one side of you as the real you and the other as a mistake. You can be the person who laughs in sunlight and the person who thinks quietly in the dark. You can be both, without shame. She also teaches that nothing in you is wasted. Even the months spent underground can develop patience, insight, and empathy. Sometimes the very qualities that help you in your brightest moments are refined in your darker ones. Kindness becomes deeper because you have known hurt. Courage becomes steadier because you have known fear. And if there is a crown in this part of the story, it is not made of gold. It is made of understanding. It is the understanding that you can survive the descent and still return with your head held high. Tonight, you can let that idea settle into your bones. You are allowed to be a person with seasons. You are allowed to be complex. Sleep is not an enemy. Sleep is the underworld that keeps you alive. A hidden workshop where the body mends and the mind sorts what the day has scattered. So when you feel yourself drifting, you can whisper, silently, that you are not falling away from life. You are moving through a doorway that has always been there. And like Persephone, you can cross that doorway with dignity. You can take only what you need into it. A slow breath, a softening jaw, a willingness to pause. Everything else can wait on the surface until morning. When Persephone rises, the myth describes the world responding almost immediately, as if the earth has been holding its breath. Demeter feels her daughter's presence before she sees her. The way you can sometimes sense a familiar person approaching, even with your eyes closed. The reunion is not presented as a simple reset. Persephone does not come back untouched, and Demeter does not come back naive. They meet as two beings who have been changed by separation, and that change becomes part of their love. This is another quiet truth. The myth offers love that lasts, is not love that never suffers. It is love that learns how to bear reality without turning brittle. In that spirit, Demeter's gift to the world is not only springtime beauty. Her gift is the return of trust. When grain grows again, it is a sign that the future can be fed. It is a sign that planning makes sense again. It is a sign that the calendar still has meaning. The old stories suggest that humans responded by creating festivals and rites, by telling the myth each year as a way to keep courage alive. A festival is not just celebration. It is a promise that joy will be practiced on purpose. Even after loss, Demeter's temple at Eleusis stands in the imagination as a place where people could admit fear of death and still leave with hope, even without secrets. The basic medicine is clear: gather, remember, share food, tell the story, and let the shared rhythm steady the heart. You might not have a temple, but you have small rituals too. A cup of warm tea, a shower after a hard day, a tidy pillow, a message to a friend, a quiet walk in the morning. These are human ways of telling Demeter, I remember, and I am still here. The compromise of the seasons also teaches something tender about boundaries. Demeter cannot keep Persephone with her every day of the year. She must share her, not because love is weak, but because love exists in a world with other powers and other needs. Many people learn this lesson in ordinary ways. Children grow up. Relationships change. Time pulls everyone in different directions. The myth does not pretend this is painless. It only shows that sharing does not have to mean losing. Demeter's grief becomes a rhythm instead of a permanent drought. Each year she feels the ache, and each year she also feels the return. In other words, she learns to live with a wound that does not have to define her whole landscape. If you carry a wound like that, you can be gentle with yourself. Healing is not measured by whether you never feel pain again. Healing is measured by whether your world can grow again around the pain, whether laughter can return, whether rest can still find you. Imagine the first morning of Demeter's relief. The ground is still cold, but it is no longer hostile. The thaw begins at the edges, in tiny places where sunlight lingers. A crocus pushes up, then another. Farmers who had been staring at barren rows begin to see green points like punctuation marks of hope. Birds return to branches that had felt like empty hands. Even water seems to move differently, less like a locked door and more like an opening. The myth makes these changes feel sudden, but in nature they still take time. And that is important too. Sometimes spring arrives as a mood before it arrives as a fact. Sometimes you feel a little lighter before your circumstances change. That little lightness matters. It is the first sprout. Demeter also becomes In this part of the story, a teacher, by giving grain, she teaches humans how to work with time, how to plant, how to wait, how to trust invisible processes. She teaches patience, the kind that does not give up, the kind that keeps water and hope in the same hands. At bedtime, patience can look very simple. It can look like letting sleep take as long as it takes. It can look like refusing to bully yourself for being awake. It can look like saying, "My body knows how to descend when it is ready, and my job is only to make the descent safe." So if you are still listening, still awake, you are not doing anything wrong. You are simply in the slow thaw. Let that be enough. Let the myth remind you that even the gods had to wait for the calendar to turn. You can let yourself be a field at night. Fields do not panic because they cannot force the sun. They simply hold their readiness in quiet soil. Do the same. Hold readiness in quiet breath. Morning will arrive whether or not you wrestle with it. Now, as we close this chapter of the myth, you can let the images become softer and slower, as if they are drifting farther away while you stay safe where you are. Picture Persephone standing at the threshold between worlds with Hermes beside her. Not hurried, not afraid. Above her, the surface is a dim dawn, gentle and pale. Below her, the underworld is quiet, not clawing, simply still. She knows both places. She belongs to herself in both places. Demeter waits in a field that has begun to breathe again. She does not demand an impossible certainty. She only welcomes what is here. She has learned that love can survive pauses. She has learned that return is part of the pattern. Let that understanding settle into your chest. Inhale slowly through the nose and feel the ribs expand. Exhale slowly through the mouth and feel the shoulders drop. Do that again and let the exhale be slightly longer, as if you are inviting the body to power down. If you want a simple phrase to ride on the breath, you can use one that fits the myth. On the inhale, I can descend safely. On the exhale, I can return in time. Repeat it gently, without force, letting it fade if it feels unnecessary. Picture the pomegranate seeds again, not as a threat, but as small points of color in a dark palm. Each seed is a thought, a task, a memory, a worry. You do not have to crush them with your teeth tonight. You can place them in a bowl and set the bowl on a shelf. Tell yourself, quietly, these can wait. The underworld can hold them for a few hours. Sleep can do its work around them without needing them to be solved. Now imagine the winter room once more. The room of thick blankets and slow clocks. The door is closed against the noise of the day. Inside, there is nothing to chase and nothing to prove. There is only the steady warmth of shelter. Let your face soften. Let your tongue rest. Let your hands relax wherever they are. If you notice a muscle gripping, you can unclasp it as if you are opening a fist around a stone and letting the stone sink into water. In your mind's eye, see a field under starlight. The field is quiet, but it is not empty. It is full of sleeping seeds, full of hidden work, full of promises that do not need to be spoken out loud. Over that field, Demeter's torch is finally lowered. It is not snuffed in despair, only set down because the search has paused. and pause is allowed. And now, let the story drift like a boat moving away from the shore. You can watch it for a moment, and then let it disappear into the dark, knowing it will still be there if you want it tomorrow. For tonight, you are free to rest. You are free to enter the gentle underworld of sleep, to let your breathing carry you down, and to trust that morning will bring you back when it is time. Listen again to the room you are in. If there is a clock, let it be a distant sound, not a command. If there is traffic far away, let it be like wind beyond a hill. If there is silence, let the silence feel like soft snow. Bring attention to the points of contact: heels, calves, hips, shoulders, the back of the head. Imagine each point melting a fraction deeper into support, as if the bed is warm sand shaping itself to you. With the next breath, let the mind widen rather than focus. You do not have to think in lines. You can think like a sky, open and spacious. A thought can pass like a cloud, and the sky remains. If the day left sharp edges, you can smooth them with compassion. You can say, I did what I could with what I had. That is enough for now. And if you want a final image, let it be spring, waiting inside winter. Picture a seed under the soil, already holding the blueprint of a stem and a leaf. It is not rushing. It is simply ready. You are like that seed tonight. Sleep is the soil that protects you. Dreams are the quiet rain. Breathing is the gentle turning of the seasons. Let your awareness become heavy in a pleasant way. Let it slide downward like a feather sinking through still air. You do not need to hold yourself up anymore. You can let go in small increments, letting each exhale take a little more of you into rest, until the last thing you notice is the softness of the dark. Let the eyelids stay heavy. Let the breath stay slow. Let the heart do what it has always known how to do. Beat and soften. Beat and soften. And if you slip into sleep mid-sentence, that is perfect. That is the story doing its final work. Not by adding more words, but by letting the words dissolve into silence